This meeting of the RTM will come to order. It's Wednesday, August 9th, 2017, 7:30, Groton Senior Center. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your summer. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Representative Adams.
Here.
Bailey.
Here.
Baker. Burrell. Bauer.
Here.
Burgos. Casper. Sini. Dean Shinbrot. Evans. Frickman. Garcia. Gilly.
Here.
Hubbard.
Here.
Kent.
Here.
Longino. Laughlin. Marr. Marley. Massett. McCabe. McDermott.
Here.
Merritt.
Here.
Nault.
Here.
Nugent.
Here.
Aubrey.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Pasqualini.
Here.
Powers.
Here.
Quinn. Sleeker Hersant.
Here.
Steinford.
Here.
Streeter. James and Arma. Swindell. Wagner. Watrous. Wells.
Here.
Williams. Wilson.
Here.
And Newsom.
Here.
19.
We have 19 members, which does not constitute a quorum, but we will continue on with the meeting. There's nothing on the agenda that we're actually voting on tonight, so we'll continue on. Will everyone please stand for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will not vote to approve the minutes of the June 14th meeting and move right on to citizens' petitions. This is the portion of the RTM agenda where the RTM welcomes comments from citizens. Each presentation should be limited to 10 minutes or less, and citizens should, if possible, submit written comments. Presentation should be limited to matters pertinent to Groton. The moderator or members through the moderator shall ask questions only in order to clarify the speaker's presentation. Responses may be given by the moderator and or by the town manager. Citizens should make their presentations from the lectern and state their name and address for the record. I don't think we have anybody signed up tonight, but is there anybody that wishes to speak before the body? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Reception of communications. Representatives Dean Shinbrot, McCabe, Massett, Casper, Sini, Wagner, and Baker all said they could not be here tonight. We'll talk to the town manager, right, because I voted on it. We actually did receive one other communication. Dear RTM members, attached is the introduction of an ordinance to designate the Planning Commission as the Planning and Zoning Commission for the town of Groton and to abolish the Zoning Commission. Under Section 5554, the RTM, upon a 2/3 vote of the total membership, shall have the power to reject any legislative ordinance passed by the council, except for an ordinance of consolidation as defined in June 7th, 2017. Section 2.6, such veto shall be filed with the clerk not more than 45 days after the enactment of such an ordinance by the council, be recorded in the ordinance book, and notice of veto shall be published. So this notice has been given to us. This has
Right, because there was a public hearing on the ordinance. The town council had a public hearing, so it's required that I send notice to you so you're aware of it. But the council has not passed this ordinance yet, so it's not, you don't have to act on it yet.
So we have 45 days to veto it if we wish to. As soon as the town council acts on it, they haven't acted on it yet. As soon as they do, the clock starts. Will this be in the minutes for this meeting? Okay. So these will be in the minutes for this meeting.
They all received it, so I sent it to everybody.
Okay.
Back in June.
Report of the town manager. I'd like to welcome our new town manager, Mr. John Burt, for his first night here in front of the RTM.
Good evening. Glad to be here. Glad to meet everybody.
Just want to put out there that anytime you need anything, please feel free to call me, stop by, email me. I'm available at your disposal. And I'll leave a pile of my cards up here in case anybody wants to take one. The financial report, and there is a summary, but the budgets were just printed. There's a summary report over on the table if you didn't get one. Hopefully everybody has one. The preliminary fund balance, reminder that these are unaudited numbers at this point. The preliminary fund balance as of June 30th, 2017 is approximately $11 million, which is 9.1% of the FYE 2017 general fund adopted budget. The capital reserve fund balance as of June 20th, 30th, 2017 is estimated at $1.8 million. Final numbers for FYE 2017 will be available once all the year-end journal entries are made. And then the general contingency budget for FYE 2018 was appropriated at $650,000. There have been no transfers out at this point. Any questions on that?
Anybody have any questions for the town manager? Okay, thank you very much. Next item is a report from the superintendent, Dr. Graner.
Well, good evening. I thought I would just give you a quick update. The Groton 2020 plan for the building of the schools is moving along. Yesterday, the Permanent School Building Committee finished the interviews of 5 candidates, 5 architectural firms that put in a bid. I think it was 5 of 12 that they interviewed, actually. They got it down to 2 firms. The references are going to be further checked this week, and I believe by this time next week we'll have an architectural firm, and that nomination will go to the town council, and the town council will make the hire at that point. Any real motion towards the building of the middle school, by the way, it was the architect for the middle school, would have to wait until the state budget is passed, because we, of course, not going to move forward until the state actually commits to the funding. Just in terms of school finances, we ended the year as the board had promised, leaving in the general fund $247,000. That was a decision that was made actually in December because of a cut to the education cost sharing grant. So that money for sure is there, and we also are pending our final audit to determine how much money. There will be additional funds that will be transferred to the general fund once we finish all the payments for the fiscal year. We also received, as we do every year, an impact aid, supplemental impact aid, which comes from the Department of Defense. This year, that money, the grant was for $260,000, and the board typically allocates, and did allocate this year, for the purchase of student and staff computers. So that's something that we leave out of the regular budget, but that money was allocated for that purpose this year. And basically, we are working hard right now to get ready. The students will be coming in. The first day of school will be the 31st of August. So at the end of this month, the facilities are ready. Supplies have been in a couple of schools over the last day or so, and we are unpacking the supplies and getting ready to welcome the children. The teachers will come in on the 28th, and we will have a couple of days of professional development. Big thing that we're doing this year is, thanks to a grant from the Department of Education Activity, or DODEA, we got now 2.5 years ago a $1.2 million grant that we used initially for the first 2 years to bring Teachers College instructors to our schools, K-8, to help the teachers implement a writer's workshop. This year, for the first 2 days of PD that we're going to have, we will be implementing the readers workshop, which has been phenomenally successful. We've actually piloted it, and so we're looking forward to that. But that's the report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any question for the superintendent? Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, Dr. Graner. With the supplement that was received for impact aid, how does that, including the added to the original amounts that were received, how does that equal to what was expected to be received from the claims that were submitted? I know that initially there was a shortfall.
Well, yeah, okay. There are two impact aid grants that come in. The big impact aid that you're talking about, that comes from the Department of Education, and we submit to the Department of Education, and we believe that grant this year will be $3.2 million. This supplemental impact aid comes from the Department of Defense, and it's if you have more than 20% of the children in your district, if they are military dependents, we get this grant. That grant comes to the board and has, over the years, really been used for technology.
So is the second one the one that is for all the forums about parents that actually live and work on federal properties?
That's the federal education one. That's the $3.2 million. And my understanding is we in contact with the Federal Education Department expect that amount of money for this year. It was about that last year, and with all the budget uncertainty at the federal level, we're still sort of have a little bit of anxiety about that. It's a big part of our budget.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Representative Merritt.
Yes, I have two questions. In the construction of the new school, the importance of the property swap and the driveway, how does that look?
The property swap, my understanding is that has been finalized.
So the town's name is on the deed for the property,
That's my understanding.
but have you seen it?
I have not.
I think that's important. And the driveway entrance,
With
that's going to become a big
Yeah.
issue.
My understanding about the driveway is that there are two possibilities. One is that we have spoken to the Department of Transportation, and they gave at least initial approval to a driveway coming off Fort Hill Road. But I know there's actually from my perspective, a preferred route, and that would, as they're building the new Grasso Tech, that there may be an opportunity to use the Grasso Tech entrance and come in that way and avoid a kind of an alternate lane from Fort Hill Road. I think that's, again, I will mention both of those to the Permanent School Building Committee.
Well, once the school is open for business,
Yes.
we own it. We have to deal with it,
Right.
no matter what it is.
Right, I understand, yeah. We're about, hopefully with the state budget, we are about 1 year away. If we got the money right now, sometime, hopefully in the late spring or early summer next year, we would actually begin construction. So we're about 3 years away from.
Because I would think these upfront issues are important without
Right.
having to redo them and spend more money,
No,
for which is going to be
yeah.
extremely hard to get.
I'll pass that along to the Permanent Building Committee, thank you.
There were, as I recall, there have been a substantial number of people who have voiced concerns about the safety of getting in and out of that property. And I would have thought that
Right.
people would have addressed that before we went to all the effort to, to go through the process of initiating a building on that property.
Well, I know that the prior town manager, and I think Mr. Reiner met with the Department of Transportation officials. And so in terms of safety, they approved that initial plan. But I think the alternate route through the Grasso Tech driveway, that may be a better route.
Representative Nugent?
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Graner. You're saying school is starting August 31st. Could you give us an update on your staffing levels? I know with the budget that was passed, you thought you might have to have fewer teachers, but then I think there was early retirements, and how did it all work out in the wash as far as your staff levels?
Yeah.
And how did the closing of Pleasant Valley go, and the reassignment of children and keeping class sizes, if you could just give us an update?
Sure. Well, the closing of Pleasant Valley resulted in the loss of 18 teaching, or the reduction of 18 teaching positions. But you're right, because of the retirement, classroom teachers, there was one school psychologist that was actually, her contract was not renewed. But the regular classroom teachers, the 17 others, they were absorbed into the system through attrition. So we lost 18 positions there. We lost, of course, the principal position. And then, if you remember, there were some other positions, and they have all been lost, at least at this point. So it comes to a total of 24 teachers, teaching positions, full-time teaching positions that have been lost. 2 custodians, maintenance worker, a secretary, the whole list that we talked about last spring, all of that has actually been reduced. In terms of the transition, we put a team together, and that went actually, because it was settled very quickly. We moved about 60% of the children from Pleasant Valley to Charles Barnum School. We were able to take some special education programs that were district-wide programs at Charles Barnum and move them to other facilities, and that's been a lot of work this summer, actually, that physical move. But there was a classroom added, 20 to 22 child classroom added to Charles Barnum at each of the grade levels. A couple were added at Mary Morrison. Several students will be attending SB Butler. We made that a kind of a parent choice. And then, of course, we expanded the enrollment at the 2 magnet schools, Northeast Academy and Catherine Kolnowski. So that all has settled in. The biggest challenge right now, as you can imagine, is the transportation of, because by and large, of course, transportation is neighborhood connected. And so we're working with a new software program, actually, and that is, we are going to publish the routes next week. So it has gone extremely well. The schools have held meetings. The children last spring actually went to their new school, and the school hosted events for them and their families. So I was sort of part of the transition, but the real work was done by some central office administrators and principals and teachers and actually some parents, and they did a marvelous job. And I would say that has gone very smoothly.
Okay, thanks very much for the update.
Representative Aubrey?
Yeah, I was looking at the minutes from the last meeting when you talked about Cutler becoming a diversity school. Could you kind of give me a synopsis of how a school becomes a diversity school?
Yes, sure. The legislation says that if you have a racial imbalance of more than 25% in a school, you have to address it. In other words, when you take the racial composition of the average of the district, which for us is 43%, no school can be more than 25% or less than 25% from that. And if the school is out of racial balance, the district has a requirement to try to address that. And what the legislation goes on to say is if the town has made efforts, good faith efforts to do that, and has failed, then they can apply to build a school, if they do apply to build a school, and it is because of persistent racial imbalance after efforts that have been taken to address it, then the school could be eligible for a diversity grant. And so what happened was when now nearly 4 years ago, when I was told that Colchester School was out of racial balance, even though it had been redistricted and so forth, we put in an application, and last spring, when the State Board of Education accepted the report, Colchester School was again out of racial balance. Instead of 25% more than the district average, it was
I think this refers to Cutler, not Colchester.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay.
What's going to happen is an interesting name change.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is, what we said to the state was, we're going to close Colchester School, and we're going to build a new school. Well, actually, we're going to renovate a school, and that problem that existed at Colchester School is going to be solved by the new school. I don't think it will be called Cutler, actually, but it would be that school at the Cutler site.
Okay, and
so
that'll be your grammar school?
Yeah, so that's the sort of the new Colchester, if you will. And because Colchester has persistently been out of racial balance, we applied for and got diversity status. So that meant the reimbursement for that school, just the one that's at the renovated Cutler, instead of it being 54% reimbursement to the town, would be 80% reimbursement.
So that'll be after we build the middle school and then start
Correct.
to get the other schools ready?
That's right, exactly.
Okay, no chance we can get that for Cutler? I mean, for West Side?
This is a very painful question. I tried very hard, and the answer was no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Superintendent, how is closing Colchester and moving those kids to what's now Cutler, how does that solve the racial imbalance issue?
Because the renovated, well, two things. The renovated school at Cutler it will be in racial balance, because we're also going to close SB Butler. And when you combine those two schools, they will be in racial balance. That's the first reason. Second reason is, if you have diversity status, or if it's a diversity school, it is a magnet, open magnet. And so we will achieve racial balance. But of course, the big thing for Groton is achieve racial balance without redistricting.
Representative Kent.
Dr. Graner, on the May 18th RTM meeting, you had offered to give us an update of your FTE figures.
Yes.
And update the spreadsheets that were in this book.
Yes.
It's now August.
Right. Well, as I said to you in the email, what I really want to do, we are still in the process of hiring some folks. So what I thought would be best is to give you the absolute final. The other specter that's hanging over everyone's head in the state is that we don't have a state budget yet, and so some of the hiring that we had hoped to do, back to Representative Nugent's point, we are not going forward with any. Even if we thought we had the money, because when these 31 people retired, it of course saved a great deal of money. But without a state budget, we are not making any kind of discretionary decisions. So what I'd rather do, and it's just a question of a couple of weeks, I'll be able to get that information.
Well, you are proceeding under some assumptions, so why don't you give us the update based on those assumptions?
I could do that, sure. Well, as I said to Representative Nugent, for sure there are 18 less teachers that reflect the closing of Pleasant Valley School, and a secretary and a principal and 2 custodians, and I can send all that. I'll send you that, and then I'll give you an update. Perhaps that'd be better.
there any other questions for the superintendent? And Dr. Graner, I think you mentioned at the June meeting that if the state does not come through, I think you said that all the money we would not be reimbursed for the money that's been spent so far, right? On the school project, if the state is not able to come through?
It would not, all the money that has been, like the architectural,
Right.
Yes, that's right. But what I'm hearing, as bad as this budget is, and it is really bad, really painful that we don't have a budget right now. But my understanding is that the state has allocated, through the bonding commission, they're getting ready to approve, I think it's $481 million worth of bonding, and we are in that. So assuming that the state budget, well, at a certain point, the state budget is going to go through. My favorite observation about the state budget comes from First Selectman of Stonington, Rob Simmons, who pointed out even during the War of 1812, when Stonington was being bombarded, they still passed the budget on time. We don't seem to be able to do that in our current state, but hopefully that will happen, because it is very destabilizing, as you know, to every municipality and every school system in the state. We desperately need a state budget, and I've been in contact with Representatives Del Cruz and Conley and Senator Summers, and you know, I think everybody's working as hard as they possibly can, but I think we're facing some tough decisions. And as you may know, the governor is now basically funding the state through executive orders, and it has already had a devastating impact on some of our most vulnerable citizens. And in about 3 weeks, if the education cuts go through, it will have devastating effects on education. So I am literally hoping and praying that we're going to get a budget. As the head of the Superintendent Association said, even if it's relatively bad news, we just need to know what the news is so we can respond to it.
Anybody else have any questions for the superintendent? Thank you. Yes, sir. Absolutely, Ms. Manager.
I apologize. At the end of my finance report, I sort of paused and didn't get a few other things I wanted to mention. I was so eager to hear Dr. Graner's report, and I totally forgot about the rest of mine. Just want to mention a couple of things from our Committee of the Whole meeting last night. I don't know if anybody watched it, but we did, I was directed to put in place a hiring freeze and a spending freeze. The hiring freeze being more of an extreme vetting. Only if we absolutely needed the positions will we fill it until we know what's going on with the budget. And then a spending freeze, they left me with the latitude of how that's going to be. So I'm working on that, hoping to have something out to all the employees tomorrow. Trying to do everything we can to limit spending until the budget gets put in place. We're also working on options for retirement plan changes for new employees. So I wanted to mention those things, that we're working hard on those things. One other thing to mention is the Sealy School, that the Zoning Commission did approve the zoning change last week from R2 residential to CA12 commercial. So that's good, and hopefully we'll be getting something going there very soon. And just a quick update on the Enterprise Information Management System. We had an update last night from Nikki Bresnan and Brian Hancock. For the that was approved in the CIP for this year, the finance, people management, land management, and work orders assessments modules. They're down to 2 qualified vendors. One, though, is way more expensive than the other because they don't do everything we need. They'd have to bring in third-party vendors. So they're really focused on one. We've had demonstrations other than finance with end-of-the-year stuff and lack of staffing. They haven't really go through the presentation yet, so we'll get there. So we're looking at one focused one. Of course, with the budget stuff, that'll likely delay things on that further. Legislation agenda management. The council would like to have software where you can get your agenda packet and have it indexed and be able to write right on the pack on your laptop or on your iPad, whatever. That's still kind of coming along slowly and likely even more slowly with the budget. We did get, our IT did move our email server to the cloud, so that increases the size of attachments we can do. So now we can send out a whole packet to the council members that was not available before. And then we just received our first copy of the IT master plan, which we'll be going through, and it includes the public safety master plan. You're going to hear from Chief Fusaro soon, and one of the things we're going to be doing when we go through it is I'll be pushing the 911 radio system he's going to talk about, and the CAD system is a high priority for the town, and my high priority, and among the police, he'll talk briefly about that, but that's a real priority for the next budget cycle. And that's all I have.
Are there any questions for the manager? Representative Pascaline?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not sure if you can answer this regarding the Mystic Education facility. Now, that's a joint between the state and the town to market it.
Yes.
And I had recently found out that somebody was interested in that, and the state squashed it. And it was a school, it was China that was interested in buying it to make that a school for China, except they wanted to purchase the land outside of the main developed area, and the state said no to the whole thing and squashed it. So I'm just curious on how close the state wants to really get rid of the property, or are they going to pigeonhole of what they want there versus we want to sell the property?
And I'm afraid I only know the bare. I've been by the school, seen it, talked to John Reiner a bit about it, but I'm not sure how the state's been to work with on it. But I will check into it, and I'll be prepared to answer that next time.
Any other questions? Representative McDermott?
John, with regard to the radios and so forth that we're going to be discussing in this next budget session, are we going to have Joe Sastry and Emergency Communications be part of that discussion?
Oh, definitely. Matter of fact, we met with me, and the chief met with a vendor the other day to talk about all the options with the system, and we're all going down with some other dispatchers and our IT to go see a demonstration of one of the possibilities for the CAD system. So yeah, we're all working closely together to make sure it all works together.
That's what we want to see eventually. We've been talking about this for years. Okay, thank you.
And that's also part of the reason for the IT master plan, is to have a more set process to make sure we've all gone through it, checked off everything on the list to make sure that it's all going to work together. But we're not going to go forward with something that does not work as we want it to.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Manager, what's the CAD system?
Computer-aided dispatch. It's for when you call into 911 dispatch. It's what actually takes the calls, helps you route the appropriate people to the address, and also tracks records with it, that type of thing.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Our next item is a report from Chief Fusaro. Chief, if you'd like to come up, please. Thank you very much, Dr. Graner.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, everyone. Hope summer's going well for everyone. I could probably expound a little bit upon what the town manager already discussed, but I thought this would be a great opportunity to tell you about some things that are going on. Kudos to Representative Obrey. We met a couple of weeks ago, shortly after the delivery of our body cameras, and we were talking about an unrelated issue, and suggested this might be a good opportunity to tell you what's going on with the police department, particularly with some of the things I have before me. But the first item, we have purchased these devices right here, which are body-worn cameras. You've probably seen a lot in the news media. The intent behind these is to document activities police officers are involved in. The ones that we bought were from a company called Axon. It used to be called Taser, but each one of our officers has one of these now, or we have them in the inventory. So when they go to a call, they're involved in an interaction where their police activity may occur. This will be activated. Each officer has one individually because we applied for a state grant from the Office of Policy and Management. So the initial expense for these items was covered by that grant. It's a reimbursement grant. Went to the council back in May. The caveat was, in order to get these funded through that grant, the purchase had to be concluded by the end of June. We did a request for proposal, got several proposals back, went through them. We decided upon this particular item because it seemed to suit our needs, best of those that we looked at, and we were able to execute the contract by the end of the June timeframe. So we submitted the packet to the Office of Policy and Management. As Dr. Graner had mentioned, there's substantial bond money out there, and that's what's going to fund these for us. Other departments in the state of Connecticut have taken advantage of that. They are not deployed yet, and the reason for that is there's certain things that we have to put in place. We've adopted a policy as required by the grant. We are now in the final stages of completing that draft policy. We've worked with our collective bargaining unit to take a look at it to make sure there are some things addressed that they were looking to have addressed. But we're also doing training, and we've got that scheduled for September. So the vendor will come out, do the train the trainer, and then these will be fielded. I was asked a question last night by the council. I did a similar presentation for them. You know, how do the officers feel about this? It's a change, and like any of us, when you're involved in an occupation and there's a substantial change or there's something that comes about, some new technology, there's a bit of apprehension and certainly there's curiosity. I have learned from my counterparts here in Connecticut and outside of Connecticut that those departments that have implemented a body-worn camera program had similar challenges and questions when they first rolled it out, but soon came to realize the benefits of having these. You've seen it in the news. You've probably seen police interactions where a body camera has been used to document incidents. What I've learned is that there seems to be a more genuine display of what's going on out there in the field. Officers have to document stuff in reports anyway, but this gives the officer's perspective. And what we've witnessed out there are some videos that come from the general public that are snippets in time and maybe don't put the whole thing in context. When you compare them to a body-worn camera at the same incident, you see a dramatic shift of events. So it will protect our officers. Quite frankly, it will reduce complaints. We do have people that come in to make complaints about interactions with officers, and this can document the incidents. And I really think at the end of the day, this is the way law enforcement is going. It's what the public expects. It does demonstrate transparency. You know, we were able to review the tapes and use them for training purposes. You know, officers have an interaction out there, and maybe some of the officer safety techniques they're using could improve. It's a good training tool. It's a good teaching tool. And again, it's something that the public is starting to expect, and I think we're witnessing that throughout the state at some meetings that I've been to. And as recently as yesterday up at the legislature, this was a discussion topic for a task force that's been implemented by the state legislature to look at police training. And the words that they were using are all those that we hear in the public domain, which is transparency, meeting standards, all the things that we're expecting our police departments to do. So this is really the newest technology that we'll be putting out there. So when you interact with officers, when you see them out in the field in the coming months, will have one of these. If any of you would like to look at it, I can certainly hand it around. This is an actual. This is one of them. I pulled out a charger. Our IT folks for the town are. I just try not to push any buttons because I don't even know what all the buttons are. So if you want to be in our evidence system, push those buttons and you'll be forever captured. But that's what the officers will be wearing. And again, it's for when they're out in public. Everyone from myself to our newest officers will be issued one of those. So any questions on that? I know that's something you probably have some questions on.
Representative Pasqualini.
Thank you. Chief, I have a couple. One of the biggest questions is what is the cost going to be for maintaining the storage? Is that going to mean an officer or somebody off the road downloading the data and storing it? How long are they going to be good for before we have to? I mean, it's great we get a grant, we get all these new things, but then who pays for the upkeep? How long are they going to stay down? And my other question is HIPAA. Guys walking in with a prisoner into the hospital. I'm not turning it off, but are we going to have a HIPAA problem? There hasn't been many challenges in court yet, and those are some big questions.
Yeah, the policy addresses many of those issues. As far as HIPAA, there's some, and this was vetted at the state level post the Police Officer Standards and Training Council put out a model policy which we have to follow. It does allow a little bit of latitude on the officer's parts particularly when it comes to those interactions. And my guidance to the officers, and based on the information in those policies, is that if you believe that there's an incident that needs to be documented because, you know, it could be a use of force incident, it could be something controversial later on, if it complies with the policy and you feel it needs to be recorded, you record it. And, you know, we can deal with that afterwards. So there are a lot of things that, you're right, haven't been tested in court. But this is to document the activities of the officer for eventual prosecution in court, and also to you know, lay a foundation for the officer's actions should they need to take certain actions. As far as the cost, the entire cost for the first year, the equipment is covered. What we did is the way we did the RFP is we did a 5-year contract, and front-loaded the expenses. There is costs for storage. And talking with our IT folks, we determined that the best option was a cloud-based solution, where the management in-house was limited, the access to redaction software, the ability to push it over to court without burning it to disk was eliminated. So we looked pretty hard at that. There is a cost on the out years. There will be costs from anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 annually after the grant, after the first year is used. So there is a cost. I provided all that information to the council when we first went down that road. And quite frankly, the way I posed it to the council is that, you know, this is available now. There has been interest. I know, you know, Representative McDermott and some of my staff and myself have talked to him about this in the past. There's money here available now. Do we want to wait a year? And I think this is how I phrased it to him. Do we want to wait a year and either the RTM or the council ask me, what are we doing about this? Is this something you're going to do? And find out, thank you, that there was an opportunity to leverage funds from the state to purchase these, and we didn't take advantage of it. So I kind of put it on the council a little bit and saying, you know, provide me guidance. Where would you like us to go with this? Is this something that we're interested in? They were interested in it. I can also tell you, having been in circles around the state with the police chiefs and some of the things that are going on right now, there is an interest among the legislature. There is an interest among groups that are ACLU, some of the ones that we met yesterday, to see these on all officers in the state of Connecticut. And some of the comments that were made by myself and other chiefs is, you know, that's all great, but there's a cost associated. And we're dealing with communities that have reduced budgets, reduced revenue from the state. You know, there needs to be money to follow this and some of the other projects that they had discussed. So, did that answer your question?
Chief, for the benefit of everybody watching, can you please explain HIPAA and the issues associated with it?
Well, I can't profess an expertise in HIPAA. If anybody in here can, please feel free to interject, but it's protected health information, essentially. And as police officers, sometimes we will deal with people in either a medical or emotional or mental crisis. So some information that we garner from that is not releasable. Things that people would deal with when they're in a hospital. But given the nature of our work, when we're dealing with someone, again, in those conditions, you know, we have to eliminate, but we can't provide that information to the general public, so we need to protect that.
Thank you. Representative Nugent?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chief, could you clarify? I'm a little confused. Will these cameras be on all the time, or at the discretion of the officer, depending on the situation and incident?
It's policy driven, so if it's a law enforcement interaction, for instance, if I go to a motor vehicle accident, it should be activated then. If I go to a dispute between people, it should be activated then. If there's a casual encounter, if the officer's going to get coffee or stopping to pick up his lunch, there's no need to have it activated at that time. But there are provisions within our policy, and I've rolled out a draft within the department. We're still working on that because we want to make sure people understand it and are comfortable with it. But you know, if an officer feels like they're going to be involved in an altercation or some type of incident that needs to be documented, it can and should be on.
Just that things, as you know, can happen pretty quickly.
That's
and
right.
Things can get out of control that you don't think they are, you know. That's my only comment.
One of the features that was in our RFP that was important to us is that we got a device. This may be, you know, when the officer goes on duty and puts this on and activates it, it's not recording, but it's on. There is a feature in this particular camera system where it can go back up to 2 minutes. So for instance, if that thing happens where it happens real quick, the officer, you know, his auditory exclusion, he's in a high crisis situation where there, you know, something unexpected happened, they could later activate this. But there's also provisions in here that understand we're human beings and occasionally things happen. So there's, you know, the policy is very, you know, very detailed on that. Like I said, it's been vetted at the state level. The original draft policy it's available to the general public on the Police Officer Standards and Training Council website. Ours, the one that we've drafted in-house, which is really that with a couple of extra things, is still in the draft form, and I intend to roll that out in a final version to the officers in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Parker.
Hi, Chief. Quick question. Did you say there's a warranty on it?
This, well, and this might speak actually to part of Representative Pasqualini's question too. With this, we purchased it's a 5-year contract that we entered into with them. After 36 months, 30 months, this gets replaced. So it's a wholesale, that was part of the agreement. So there are warranties on it. I mean, clearly if something's broken because of negligence, then.
So you have enough for current officers and then ones coming out of the academy. So if you get new people, do you have to purchase it individually?
We can. This is about $399 for each one. Then there's licensing. I don't anticipate needing to purchase any more.
Okay. And how much was the licensing?
I don't know that. I can't remember that off the top of my head.
Final question. The 20 to 40,000 for the keeping of the storage and stuff, is that going to be under the IT department, or is that going to be under your department?
I believe it will be under the IT department.
Okay.
I think that's the way most, you know, most are constructed that way.
Representative Kent.
Does the city of Groton and Groton Long Point also get these?
They can apply for it. When we first had these discussions, Chief Davern and I met with a couple of vendors to look at these. You know, we had some discussions about a way we wanted to go. They're available to everyone. At the time, the decision was made that they weren't going to go forward with it, but I opted to do that. It wasn't made in a vacuum. We did do it collaboratively and had some discussions. It's just the conscious decision at the time not to do that for you know, purely for reasons that were known to them. Not critical of that, you know, it was just a business decision. Again, I presented this to the council to say there's a grant available now, and at the time the grant expired on June 30th, 2017. Did we want to take advantage of that grant while it was still available? And the decision was to do that and to move forward.
Could I add to that?
Representative Parker.
There were certain areas that there's a 2-tier on that grant, wasn't there? There's some areas that had an extended time period.
No, at the legislature, it was based on a law that was passed a couple of years ago. It was a time frame, and you're right, there was a tier. If you applied for the grant by June 30th of 2017, you got 100% reimbursement. After that date, you would get 50% reimbursement for the next year. In this legislative session, there was some tweaks to that, where you could apply for in-car cameras. It happened very late in the legislative session. As you know, there's still a few things hanging out there from this legislative session, like a budget. So that, you know, that has changed since then too. But yes, you're right. There was a tiered response. If you wanted 100%, you could have gotten it by the 30th of this year. If you wanted to get 50% reimbursement, and after that it wore out. But again, the legislature readdressed it because I think they sent the message to law enforcement it was important to them. So that has changed since then. Yes, sir.
Representative Wells.
Well, for a lack of a better word, term, have you gotten any feedback from your clientele, the folks you know?
From the officers or from the general public?
The folks you interact with, arrest.
No, because not so much, because we did test and evaluate several different cameras, a couple of different cameras. I did not, as far as getting any calls about we like it, we don't like it. I can say in a general sense, from what I see in talking with other officers, talking with people out there in the public, and talking with some of our other elected officials, that there's an interest in doing this, that they want to see officers with this.
Well, I was thinking more, you know, I used to know people, they all got old, died, they're, you know, too old to chase through the streets, but they were they had opinions on this officer, that officer, the other one, and so on. And I was just wondering if you'd heard from the folks you were rounding up and if they had any feedback one way or
I'll let you know
another.
after we've had them out in the field for a while. Then I'm sure I can give you a better answer to
no,
that.
good.
We'll have to make sure they get their best side when they take the picture. Representative Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chief Ferrarzo, do they work at night? Does
Yes.
it have like a low-level light?
Well, yes, they do work at night, but here's the thing about that, and I've been to some classes recently. There are devices out there that will enhance eyesight, that will, infrared, have a wider field of view, all these things that, if you think about it, sound kind of good. But the reality is, when we go to court and we testify, it's about the officer's perception. So if this device is better than the human eyes and better than, has a wider field of view than the officer has, it's not representing what the officer does. So that's the way this product was designed. It's designed to simulate what the officer would be able to see and what they would be able to perceive. So if we're enhancing that, for instance, if it's low light, it's at night, an officer has an encounter and he sees something that he perceives as a threat and he reacts to it, that's what he's going to see with the level of ambient light. If we have now introduced something that the officer couldn't have perceived, couldn't have seen, that's problematic because it's going to give a different view. Particularly when they have to go to court and you're presenting, officers testifying that, hey, this is what I saw, this is what I perceived, this is what I felt, but yet this is showing something different than what the officer would have been able to perceive.
Thank you. And just another question,
Sure.
Pretty simple. Does it record sound?
It does. It has audio on it as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you, Representative
Moderator.
Bailey. Chief, another question. Is the feedback that you've gotten suggest that they act as a deterrent against somebody who might otherwise commit a crime against a police officer, but because they're on camera wouldn't?
The data I have, and I've read a lot of things and gotten reports from the Department of Justice, and there's stuff out there that's open source, but there's stuff that I've also gotten through training and some classes I've attended recently. It reduces use of force incidents. There's documentation that use of force incidents becomes reduced, whether that's because an individual realizes that they're being recorded. I can't answer that, but there is a trend in that direction, and it has a dramatic effect on the complaints against officers. Believe it or not, we do get complaints where people will come in and say an officer did this. We'll put a lot of time and energy in investigating that and running it to ground because we're obligated to do that, to find that maybe that person's perception was not reality. Maybe they're giving a false complaint for some other reason. Or, on the other hand, maybe the officer's actions were inappropriate, and we need to address that as well. So those are some of the things that I've learned through using these and talking to other people about them as well.
Interesting. I'd ask the town manager to maybe take a look at other towns that have deployed the system and see if maybe they've been able to reduce their insurance because of less concern for or less risk by deploying those cameras. So if other towns have had success in doing that, it'd certainly be something we'd want to take a look at.
I should also point out, we would be the first in southeastern Connecticut to utilize this. I believe that one of the tribal police departments does have them. As you know, there's considerable video surveillance within those facilities to begin with, but as far as the municipal department, to my knowledge, there's one in northeastern Connecticut, but several in central and western Connecticut, but southeastern, I think we'd be the first.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else have any questions for Chief Fusaro?
I have a couple other items, if I may.
Yes, sir.
This was posed as a question to me last night, and I think you probably have seen this in the news as well, but some of the patrol vehicles that we have, the Ford Explorer model police vehicle, you've probably seen some reports about carbon monoxide issues. I'm happy to say that we were made aware of this a couple of weeks ago. We worked with the town garage. They've inspected some of our vehicles. We haven't identified any problems as of yet. One vehicle had an unrelated issue that they were able to handle a couple of months back, but kind of out of an abundance of caution, as they say, we've proactively gone out and purchased small, and I have one, I left it in my office, small cards. They're really for the aviation industry, but what it does is we're going to affix that to the interior of the cruiser. So it changes color when there's a hazardous condition. From the reports that I've gotten from our vendors and from the people that work on our vehicles, a lot of this originally was attributed to aftermarket products being installed in cars. As you know, our police cruisers have a lot of technology in it. We have computers, we have speed detection devices, we have cages, we have mounts for all kinds of stuff, we have lights, sirens, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into the vehicle after it's received, so it can be outfitted for patrol use. Ford was indicating that some of the problems may have come from drilling and holes being put in that allowed fumes to come into the passenger compartment. We're looking at it hard. We're taking it seriously. We'll put out a bulletin to the department as a whole. And, you know, again, one of those protective measures we're taking is to put that little, you know, $4 card on the dashboard of the vehicle so that, you know, officer gets in that and they see that thing, you know, changing colors. They know that there's a problem. They can, you know, we'll deadline the vehicle, and there's other small stuff that they can do to, you know, ensure that that doesn't happen. But we're also in constant contact with Ford. Even as recently as yesterday, a bulletin came out from them, and I'm pretty happy with the collaboration and the work we've gotten with Public Works and Bob Charette in the town garage to make sure that if there is an issue, that we address it, but we're doing it proactively now. I just point that out because it did come up. I was asked that question last night by a counselor. And just for the sake of speeding things up, I know that the town manager had mentioned a couple of things, was asked some questions, but two projects that I think are critically important to the department, and we really need some input and assistance from the council and from the RTM, because these are not small items. These are not inexpensive items. The first of which is probably the highest priority is our radio system. What I have here are two radios. One, which is a portable radio that is still in service with our officers. This device was purchased roughly 20 years ago. You know, the batteries have been replaced, but this device, this radio, that is really the lifeline of our officers, has exceeded its useful life. So about 2 years ago, the council and RTM approved a capital improvement project for us to look at collaborating with the city of Groton for radio communications, for being able to do interoperable communications as well. And there was a study, $100,000 was put forward as part of the initial CIP to study that. Well, I was able to work with some to get that study done by our vendors to look at the coverage areas throughout the town and do that really at a significantly reduced rate. So the council approved utilizing money to buy some number of radios and infrastructure. So we did purchase radios, newer radios. This is new technology right here. This has been in service for less than a year. They're not cheap. These radios, you know, this radio when it was purchased was probably $500 or $600. This radio, about $6,000. This radio does have the capability of talking to multiple agencies. For instance, because this talks on multiple frequencies, I can talk to the city of Groton, I can talk to the town of Stonington, to Ledyard, to our surrounding police departments. Not every one of our officers would get this, but we bought a small number of these for the supervisory staff to fulfill the spirit and intent of the council, and I believe the RTM, and able to be able to talk to these other police departments. As a practical matter, we share borders with other towns, other municipalities, other departments within the town. So when an incident happens, we need to be able to communicate, and that was one of the problems identified post 9/11 with, you know, silos not being able to talk to one another. But as I said, this is older stuff. We're trying to replace our officers' radios as we need to with newer technology. However, it doesn't matter which one of these radios I'm using. If the backbone doesn't work, if the system is in need of repair, I could give you the best radio. It's not going to be able to transmit. It's not going to be able to cover all the areas. And the system that we have in place right now at the police department is an 800 megahertz system that was rolled out about 30 years ago. When it came out, it was state of the art. It was probably one of a kind in this area. It was the people at the time that put this in play, you know, were forward thinking. It's kind of the standard now. Many other departments have that type of radio system. However, it has degraded over years. There's repairs that need to be made. There are areas that we should enhance for coverage, because again, when an officer's out there, when they're interacting with the public, or God forbid, they're in a fight or they need assistance, this is the lifeline. This is what they call back to the dispatch center. We've done an analysis with the vendor that we're currently using, which happens to be the same vendor now that is used by Groton Fire Alarm. We had a situation where we had 2 radio systems within the building, one managed by Groton Fire Alarm, one managed by the police department, they weren't really connected, and more importantly, they had different people working on them. So, for instance, if I had a problem with my radio system, it's interfaced with the dispatch center. Sometimes my vendor couldn't fix the problem, we'd have to go to the other one. Right now, we're using the same vendor, which I think makes sense. But ours is in need of repair, and it is a significant outlay of money. It is an important issue, not just to me, but to our officers every day that go out there and rely on this. Recently, myself, Joe Sastry, and the town manager met to discuss that. We discussed that with our vendor, went over a lot of the nuances as to what should be done, what those costs would be. I wish I could tell you it's cost neutral, that it wouldn't cost us anything to repair this, but that's not the case. We do need to make improvements to it. They are significant outlays of money, and we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million to make some of the repairs and do some of the things that we need to do. Like everything, technology moves quickly. I did mention to the council last night, my goal is to look at something for the interim time for the 5 to 10 year period, because I think we'll all be seeing technology advance so rapidly, like we've already seen in the last 10 years, over the next 10 years, where these collectively may be obsolete, where we're using voice over internet protocols for radio communications, where this is reliable communication to be used out in the field. So I think technology will continue to advance, but we do need to do some investment, and we do need to make some improvements in what we've got so far. Yes, sir.
Representative Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chief, is there any intention or a possibility that you're able to communicate with sub-base security with these radios?
We can, yeah. We have a pretty good relationship with them, but these, they're not I don't believe it's programmed in this. This is, again, relatively new, but, when there's an incident at the sub-base, we know about it pretty quickly.
Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Chief, I thought about 8 or 9 years ago, the department purchased new radios. I seem to recall the RTM approving the expenditure, and because the point was that there were dead zones in the existing radio technology throughout towns, hills and valleys, things like that, where an officer couldn't communicate. I thought we had purchased new radios.
I think over the years we have purchased some numbers at times of radios for cruisers, for portable radios for officers. I think that's probably true. I can't speak from experience as I wasn't here, but what I can tell you is, again, no matter how good the radio itself is, the backbone needs to be fixed, and we've made some modest improvements, but even with some of those modest improvements, there's still issues with our current system.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chief, I'm kind of confused. The CIP that you originally mentioned before was for emergency communications, and that sounds like it was more Mr. Sastry's realm. Now you're talking about the radios, and I, and maybe some of the other members, may have been under the impression that emergency communications were all of your radios, cars, the repeaters, the handhelds, the dispatch, all the emergency communications. The $100,000 that we had approved last year, not this past current budget, the previous one.
2 years ago, maybe.
Okay, 2 years ago. Was supposed to do the study and so forth for emergency communications. And I, again, was under the impression that that was car radios, repeaters, towers, handhelds, everything together. What I kind of take from tonight is that's not the case.
There was $100,000 to look at the police radio communications, and I don't have the actual document in front of me, but I think it talked about being able to communicate between the city and town. It was specific to police, and it did talk about those systems. I was able to talk to vendors that were able to do an analysis of it. We had a separate vendor at the time. They did coverage maps. They looked at where the towers were, locations, dead spots. So that was fulfilled. Again, the council, we went back because we had a dire need at the time to make some, to replace some items that were not working. Since we were able to do that at really with the current vendor under the current contracts, we didn't pay much for it. It wasn't $100,000 for the study. Study was completed, and that money, through the discussions with the town council, and this was all, the money itself was in place before I arrived as chief. They saw fit to reallocate it so we could start making some of those improvements and purchases with that small amount of money to begin some of those improvements.
So the remainder of the improvements, I would take it, would still fall into the same type of CIP under emergency communications and would still probably come to us through Mr. Sastry.
I'd certainly love to play a role in that. I think that the problem exists.
Not to cut you out, of course.
Yeah,
not.
The problem exists. I will say this, and there doesn't appear to be the same concern about radio communications with the other systems in place. With the police system, there's a concern. That's where the bulk of the problems are.
Higher rates of upgrades, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think maybe some of the enhancements there were things that were made over time with that system that seemed to keep it contemporary and keep it functional. Maybe on our part, we could have done a little bit more over the past 20 or 30 years to maintain that contemporary status, to make sure that some issues were addressed. I don't know why it was done or wasn't done. I just know right now we need some improvements to our radio system.
And the reason I try to clear up the confusion about who is doing what with what is the fact that the remainder of that CIP looks for, within the next year or two, another $300,000 to do more enhancements, more whatever the initial money was going to figure out what they needed.
Right.
And as much as the idea of talking to the other, combining the other, it's not of the other police departments. It's mainly concerned with the town right now.
That's
Correct.
right. That's
Thank
right.
you.
Are there any other questions? One quick one before you go.
Sure. I have one last item too. So.
Oh, okay. Why don't you go ahead?
And it speaks to something that was asked before, CAD and RMS. Again, we have, the town manager explained it briefly, but CAD is a computer-aided dispatch. And essentially what that means is if we get a call for service, any kind of call, a burglary, a car accident, assist a citizen for some reason, call will come in to the dispatch center, an entry will be made. And what that does is it dispatches, it goes to the officer's in-car computer, and it says, you need to go to 123 Main Street for this type of call. So the officer responds there. It has a tracking mechanism, what time the call came in, what type of call it was, and how it resolves. And it helps us account for the activities of our officers. Another example would be is if an officer is out there conducting traffic enforcement, he stops a car, they issue a summons, they issue a traffic ticket, they give a warning, whatever activity they do, it documents that. Now what ends up happening there is the officer ends up writing a report. So let's say under that scenario, he stops a car, arrests an individual for driving under the influence. So you have a certain amount of information in the CAD system, and then he goes to write his report or her report in a different system, the records management system. And from that, we produce police reports that end up going to court, that document the activities that happen in town, that provide data to the state, that provide data to the Federal Bureau of Investigation to compile data for crime analysis. We have two different systems that don't connect. Under most of these systems, they're completely connected, so that when that officer stops a vehicle and they issue a traffic ticket, it populates the information in this other system. So instead of saying, I stopped John Doe at this time, put that in the system, it moves over to the other ones. Right now, we don't do that. It stays, they're kind of silos where they don't connect. We've talked to the vendors about potentially getting them to connect. but because they're two different systems, proprietary reasons, business practices, what have you, they will not connect. They will not connect, and we've had individual conversations. The records management system right now is totally within the purview of the police department. The CAD system is within the dispatch center. But really, we have a demand for that information. And what I found shortly after arriving here is, as you know, there was some information that came to, there was a study done by the state about racial profiling data. Some of the information that we provided was wrong, was lost. Some of the problem was on our fault, where we provided bad data. And the reason is we were not tracking it the same. Even to this day, on Monday mornings when I get a briefing from the patrol lieutenant, he will say, well, we have X amount of traffic stops. We had 30 traffic stops in this system, but we've only got 25 of them in this system. So there's clearly a disconnect because they're not talking together. It does create an exorbitant amount of redundancy and effort on our records personnel as well as our officers to re-enter data, and it is inefficient. It does not allow our officers to get done with one task and move on to another. And for crime mapping, for a management tool, it does create other issues, and we're constantly going back and forth trying to gather data in order to provide reports to prepare, you know, in the winter months to prepare for the budget season, to give data to you and to the council to say, hey, this is what's going on. We've been looking at something as a solution for that. We're looking at ways to do a better job of that. And as the town manager mentioned, this week we're going, several of us from the police department as well as the town manager, several members of dispatch, dispatchers, Joe, several others, to go look at a system to see if there is maybe something a little bit better, a better way to do this. Again, there's cost associated with that. I know, you know, we have two different systems that don't connect. So if we could find something that works for both halves, that seems to provide the services and the information that dispatch needs as well as what the police department needs, it seems to be a good thing for both sides. Is that a pretty accurate description of it?
I think it's important, too, to mention that both these items would be needed for any kind of cost sharing with the city. Any kind of true collaboration could happen. These are roadblocks to making that happen. So, something we have to do, and just for safety, these are just things we have to do.
Representative Wilson?
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. So, Chief, realizing you haven't been here very long, same thing for the town manager. How long have these two systems not talked together?
They have.
I'm sorry, Mr. Representative Pasqualini may actually have that answer.
They've never talked. They've never talked.
Okay, never's a long time. I'm actually looking for a number of years that we've allowed these systems to inaccurately discuss information between the two of them.
I was going to say probably since around 2009, 2010, from what I've looked into.
Thank you.
Representative Pasqualini, you have something to add to that?
Yes, as I remember sitting here debating this with Mr. Sastry and everybody else on why we were going to have a system that's not compatible, and we were going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. And I was told that they were working with the other vendor, and it was going to be connected. So now we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on something that we shouldn't have went into to begin with. We should have had a system to where dispatch adds the information in. When the officer comes in to write the report, the information is there and not spending time retyping. So this is, thank you, Chief. Unfortunately, we have to spend a lot more money to correct what we should have done a long time ago.
Go ahead, Chief. Absolutely.
I understand that. I appreciate that. And what we've been looking at is trying to do things. We understand the fiscal climate. We understand that, you know, nobody wants to spend good money after bad. There is like anything, there's a lifespan with these systems as well. One of the products that we're looking at, quite frankly, is marketing it very hard, very aggressively, price-wise, trying to extend out payments, to try and take a look at what we're using for service fees or what we're paying in service fees now to make it as cost neutral as possible. It won't be cost neutral. I don't mean to create a falsehood there, but Again, one of the vendors, and I think out of, we got to do our due diligence to go out and look at it. And I think that's why we're making a field trip later this week to see if that's something that would work for us. I know it works for most other municipalities in the state.
If you see their coverage map, they own most of the state. It's a good system. And there's not a lot of other options out there.
At the end of the day, we have to have something that works for both sides. We need to collaborate on this. We can't, two parallel lines that don't intersect isn't going to work for this. It won't be good for either side.
Representative Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chief, it's my understanding that the city of Groton has a system that you enter it once and done. Are you looking at what system they have, or?
In fact, the records management system is the same system that they have. Again, we've gone through this client-first analysis. That's one of the systems that wouldn't work with the CAD system, meaning the records management system we have now is the same system that the city of Groton uses for both CAD and records management. Now, the different nuance to this is incorporating fire service in it and the ability to utilize certain software that they use. Firehouse software is the kind of the standard that our fire departments use in order to dispatch and get the data that they need. So whatever we have, whatever we purchase needs to collaborate with that, needs to work with that and extract the data for them to use as well. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so that's the difference then between us and the city, is the extra requirement of the fire departments? Is that what you're?
Yes, and the fact that, yes, that, the city has they have the same company that we have for just our records management. The CAD system in the town is an entirely different system. It's not compatible with either one of them. So it's two different things. I don't know if I'm explaining that right to you, but is it clear as mud? Does it make sense?
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
Representative Parker.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The CAD system that you guys have currently does the fire as well?
It does fire and police. As far as the functionality with fire, I can't speak to that, but yes, it does. It does police.
So, tell me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the current RMS have a fire part?
I don't know. No, it's purely the police records management.
No, I meant the whole entire system. Were you able to find out that if they could do fire?
I believe they do. Yes. I don't know how. We've had these discussions internally certainly with members of dispatch trying to figure out what works. I don't know how good either one of them was with fire. That's why we're going down there to look at the system this week. Okay. I'm told at the time that when the system that the city and we use for records management was used, it didn't suit the needs of the fire service. Okay. I'm told that's why, one of the reasons why there were two different systems picked.
Okay.
Representative McDermott.
Chief, we're just through a little over half of the year, 2017. Do you have a sense of where we are as far as categories of crime are concerned, like against 2015, as far as violent crime is concerned, drugs, assault, that kind of thing?
Sure. I think you can, well, again, some of the data that we have needs to be vetted a little bit more. But I think you've probably seen in the paper some of the work our officers have done with, even in the last 2 weeks, with a lot of drug activity. I'm here to tell you that drugs have not gone away, that the opiate problem still exists here. So, the data as far as what we have today compared to 2 years ago, I don't know that off the top of my head. But we're still seeing plenty of crime in town. It's not the statistical data that I think you're looking for, but I can't rattle that off the top of my head, but I can certainly look into it. I know it's an interest of yours all the time, so if you want to give me a shout, I'll get that data for you.
Chief, we were shown a bag of bent firing pins, I believe, from the Glocks, and there was concern about malfunctioning firearms. How's that problem been addressed?
We have purchased new firearms. We've done that through last not this fiscal year, the previous fiscal year. There was funding left over, went through the town manager to use a small amount of money and then take existing firearms, have them examined by a vendor for trade-in value, as well as some other firearms that we had in our inventory that have collected over years to trade in. We're in the process of that transition now, so we're able to purchase them utilizing the stuff that we have, as well as some money that was left over from fiscal year 2016, and we're in that process as we speak.
And what is it you're purchasing?
Sig Sauer P320s.
It's pretty expensive, right? They're a very expensive firearm, the Sig Sauer. What drove you to the SIGs?
We did an analysis. Our firearm staff looked at it, figured out what was best for our needs, and the fact that they're a modular system. In fact, the one that we selected is the one that shortly after we selected it, the United States Army picked it for their new firearm for soldiers. So I think we had a role to play in that. They must have come to Groton to figure out what we were looking at. But no, you know, we did a pretty careful analysis, looked at a bunch of different platforms that were out there. The consensus was that was the best firearm for us at the time.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the chief? Representative Nugent.
Thank you, Chief. This piggybacks on what Representative McDermott was asking. Do you find, because we are a summer coastal community, are there more demands on your department in the summer? I mean, we have summer people, a lot of tourists. I mean, do you just find you're busier or more calls? Or, I mean, I don't expect you to have statistics, but just your impressions.
As a general rule, yes. I mean, people are out more. They're more active. You know, parties are more prevalent. People, you know, with DUI enforcement typically goes up during the summer as well as around the holidays. You know, and sometimes that leads to other things like domestic violence. What I've seen is because of our proximity. You know, we are located between Boston and New York. Some of the criminal activity that I've seen involves narcotics. Again, being located where we are, we see a lot of influx from the sub-base. You know, sailors coming in, you know, for a short amount of time. The industry brings in people. Plus the fact that we've got a bunch of hotels in town, so that does bring in people. The tourist season does pick up. Our activity does increase during the summer months. So in a general sense, yes, but there are other factors that play into that as well.
And I think Groton has a lot of on-off of exits of 95, so people can come in quick and they know they can get out quick. I don't know if that adds to it, but
yeah, what we've seen. Not identifying any place specifically, but because of that, people will come here. You know, we've seen prostitution, we've seen human trafficking in town. We've made arrests in those type of cases. I believe the comment I made last night to the council, and I stand behind this because I'm very proud of the work that our officers are doing every day. But certainly some of the stuff that's happened recently, where we're doing collaborative efforts with other agencies to target narcotics, opioids, you know, prostitution. You know, human trafficking. They've done an outstanding job. Our officers are doing a great job in that regard every day, and I think you've seen the results in the newspaper and the press releases we put out pretty regularly. So you know, my goal is to make Groton as unpalatable for the criminal element as we possibly can. Do that through effective policing and making sure that when we identify a problem, we target that problem. We, you know, we work with the community in order to make them take their business and activities elsewhere.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
Chief.
you.
We appreciate it. We'll move on to liaison reports. Are there any liaison reports tonight? None. Committee reports. Finance, Chairman Nault.
No meeting, no report.
Community Development, Chairman O'Bray. Education, Chairman Nugent.
No meeting, no report.
Recreation, Chairman Wilson.
No meeting, no report.
Public Safety, Chairman McDermott.
No meeting, no report.
Public Works, Chairman Dean Chinbrad is not here. Is there?
No meeting, no report.
Thank you. Rules and Procedures, Chairman Masson. Very good. Budget discussions. Does anybody have anything they want to say about the budget? Please don't. Other business. Is there any other business? Representative McDermott.
I'd like to make a couple of referrals. Is that okay, given the fact that we don't have a quorum?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to make the following referrals to the Rules Committee. I recommend that when we set up our committees, that the chairperson and the members of that committee have no relationship by way of receiving remuneration. In other words, if they're employed by the town or the Board of Education or any subdivision, with the committee to which they are appointed. Voting on the floor by any member for any reason is, of course, unchanged and sanctioned by the charter. I've had people tell me they voted a certain way to protect their job interests. Therein lies the conflict. I'd like the committee, the Rules Committee, to examine this referral in relation to our Rule 8.1, which discusses conflict of interest. The Charter Revision Commission has recently visited this topic and recommends that no town or Board of Education employee sit on a governmental body. Further, I'd like to suggest that committees be changed with every other RTM election beginning in 2017, so that no committee has the same makeup for more than 4 years, and that fresh viewpoints are enabled. I don't believe that longevity has any substantial benefit. There are obviously departments that people have an interest in and wish to promote more than others. However, a dispassionate consideration of the budget is paramount and more important than our partialities. Selection of individuals for committees can be by lot or some other method to be determined by the moderator. The only committee I believe requires a specific qualification is perhaps finance. There I suggest fine-tuning is required to select a knowledgeable and suitable chairperson. I believe we owe our best, transparent, and maximum effort to Groton's citizens and taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman McNeil. That will be referred to the Rules Procedures Committee. And I want to reinforce that Rule 8.1, which talks about people voting whether or not they should disqualify themselves if there's a conflict of interest. I think the language in Rule 8.1 is vague, and I would also want the Education Committee, man, the Rules Committee, Rules Procedures Committee to review the language of that rule, and if there's any clarification needed, make their recommendation to the RTM. Chairman Massett isn't here tonight, but we will make sure that she gets that referral.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to report that the Charter Revision Commission is having a public hearing on their draft report on August 21st. That's a Monday at 6:30 at the Town Hall Annex in Community Room 1. There will be an ad in tomorrow's legal page for advertisements. And the draft will be available on the website next Monday. So it's huge. If you have any questions, you can always contact the clerk's office, since we support it. The minutes are available on the website. They're lengthy, sometimes 18 pages for each meeting. Okay?
So the draft report will be on the town website?
Yes, it will. What it'll look like is a two-page, 2 or 3 pages from the commission just explaining their rationales in a very minimal amount. They really encourage people to read the minutes from the meetings, because that's where you really understand. But then the other portion will be the entire charter that'll have red lines for what's being removed and blue text that what's going to be additional. So, manner in which the questions on the ballot for the referendum hasn't been totally decided. That'll come later. And whether it makes it to November, that hasn't been determined yet.
Is there any other business before we adjourn? Very good. Since we don't have an official meeting, we don't need to vote to adjourn. So I will just say we're adjourned. Good night. Thank you.